Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a pretty intense look at a narrative structure that's defined entirely by its limits. It's what the source calls a dialogue-only story, focusing on, well, some really heavy themes: taboo, deception, power dynamics. Our mission really is to see how you can convey such an extreme scenario using just minimal, kind of indirect information.
Yeah, it's fascinating. For you listening, think of it as a case study in narrative hiding, almost. Yeah. The whole thing hinges on this incredibly strict communication setup, like absolute rules. Son only talks to mommy only talks to daddy, but through lies, basically, and innuendo. And daddy, he only talks to the door.
Wow, okay, so it's this completely closed loop, designed, it sounds like, for maximum tension with minimum explicit description. Let's maybe unpack the players in this deceptive triad, you called it. Starting with mommy. She's central, right?
Absolutely central. She's the conduit. Now, the source uses some very strong degrading labels like sow slutty, but the key thing is what these mean for her function. She's the emotional hub. She apparently resents daddy, but has this unconditional love for the son.
Okay.
So her job is to maintain what the source actually calls eloquent obscurity. She has to obscure things elegantly. She's compliant on the surface, but the source points to this internal state: conflicting, vulnerable, responsive, pleasure. It's complex.
That's heavy terminology. So she's this conflicted conduit. What about the initiator, the son? How's he defined functionally?
Right. The son, he's tagged as the deliberately glib rake, which sounds, archaic, but it means his focus is purely on mastery, on dominance using mommy. His actions are specifically designed to get that audible response from her, to force her into that dialogue she has to have with daddy. The source actually specifies his action as slap molesting. That's the structural trigger for the whole cycle.
Okay, the trigger. And then there's daddy, outside the door, in the dark, literally and figuratively. He's characterized by confused, scared panic. He can hear everything but can't see. It sounds like observant ignorance, as the source puts it.
Exactly that, observant ignorance. He hears the signals, the sounds, the dialogue, but his denial is crucial. It's not passive. It's like the structural glue holding the whole scenario together. Yeah. He chooses not to process it. If his denial cracks, the system fails.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. How does the story show what's happening if explicit action words are basically banned? It's all indirect.
Completely indirect. Obliquity is everything. You see it in mommy's lines to daddy. Things like, he's stopping love, or teaching him his manners so well. Masterpieces of obscure innuendo dialogue, right? Yeah. She's actively lying to keep daddy in denial, even while she's involved.
Right, lying while participating.
And because you can't just say what's happening, the source uses sound itself as the action sequence. It's not just background noise. It introduces what it terms pleasurable onomatopoeia dialogue, these kind of guttural sounds. Glorf, schlep, blorp, drumpf. These sounds replace the verbs. They signal to you, the reader or listener, how things are progressing, the intensity.
That's clever. Yeah. It bypasses sight, focuses purely on sound, and wait, the source also mentions her face, right? Something about her expression.
Yeah, good point. The narrator, though limited, focuses almost entirely on mommy's facial structure, vibe, behavior. Those tiny shifts, shame, pleasure, resistance, they become the key visual data points. It's all incredibly subtle.
Okay, so this whole mechanism, it builds to a specific endpoint.
It does. A single, specific, audible climax. The psychological breaking point is defined very precisely. Mommy oinks only when she piglet breaks at end final. And that oink isn't random. The source defines it as the moment of, euphoric surrender. The final sound that signals, internally maybe, oops, I'm broken.
Wow. Oops, I'm broken. And the fallout. The actual consequence, is that also minimal?
Extremely minimal and specific. The source material is absolutely clear. The only thing that breaks ever is mommy's marriage.
Yeah.
That's it. The extreme actions, the denial, the psychological toll, the structure contains it all, except the marriage bond. That snaps.
So wrapping this up, what you've just shown us is how a story built on extreme restriction can actually use deception and denial as the literal engine of the plot.
Exactly. It's kind of staggering how much intensity gets packed in when direct description is off the table and communication itself becomes the tool or the weapon.
Yeah, truly.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider. In this kind of extreme dialogue-only story where the only thing that physically breaks is the marriage, does it imply that the deepest damage doesn't come from the explicit act itself, but from the failure of denial? The failure of those eloquent lies. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many everyday situations rely on similar, maybe less extreme layers of innuendo and just selective hearing to keep going?
A lot to mull over there. Definitely consider the power of what isn't said, especially when things get intense. Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're plunging into a really unusual document. It feels less like a story outline, more like a technical blueprint for some pretty extreme conflict.
Yeah, it's highly technical, and it sets up these incredibly rigid character roles and a very controlled way information flows. Very specific.
Right. So our mission for you listening is to kind of quickly get the hang of this core communication structure and, understand the specific emotional stuff driving this really taboo focused scenario.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how the source material basically insists the whole thing has to be an intense, taboo-focused, dialogue-only story. It's completely built on, consent.
Woman and talking.
Exactly. Verbal communication is the main way tension gets built. We're looking at a system really designed to maximize emotional stress just by keeping things obscure.
Okay, so let's unpack this chain of command then, because it's super specific, really designed for keeping things separate, right?
Totally. The structure lays out this strict flow. Son talks to mommy, mommy talks to daddy.
Daddy talks through the door at both. It's like a literal wall made of communication rules.
It is. It creates this protective layer around what's actually happening. Daddy has to be kept at a distance.
And the way they do that.
The mechanism is this thing called obscure innuendo dialogue that basically defines mommy's job in the narrative.
Okay.
She has to be a liar. Her main role is hiding the reality using, suggestive indirect language. And the perspective, third person omni, means we're mostly getting descriptions of the mood, the vibe, not so much explicit actions.
Wow, okay. So the structure itself dictates the mood. Let's look at the characters now, starting with Son, the dominant one.
Right. His description basically translates to dominance through this kind of casual, almost glib sexual manipulation, not brute force.
And it specifically says he needs to escalate when daddy says stop. So his motivation is just purely achieving mastery over the whole situation.
Exactly. If Son is the aggressor seeking mastery, then mommy is like the core instability of the whole thing.
How so?
Well, the blueprint paints her as being pushed to extremes. Sow slutty to the extreme is the phrase used. But at the same time, she's apparently, riddled with shame and conflict.
A contradiction, though.
A huge one. This constant internal fight between pleasure and vulnerability on one side, and then deep resentment, even hatred for daddy on the other.
And the outcome is set.
It seems totally predetermined. The document insists the only thing that breaks, ever, is mommy's marriage.
Mm-hmm.
She's basically the designated breaking point for the narrative.
Okay. And meanwhile, daddy is just stuck.
Unwitting. Completely. Defined by being passive. He's confused, scared, panic, always described as in denial, obscured.
But he still trusts her.
Yeah. Maintains absolute faith in mommy, even though the narrative makes sure he's constantly approaching understanding. He never quite gets there. He's trapped, just outside the door.
Right. Which brings us back to that narrative goal you mentioned.
Eloquent obscurity.
Yeah.
The idea is to get maximum psychological punch, maximum tension, through really powerful suggestion, not by spelling things out.
And this is where it gets really bizarre with the techniques, how mommy communicates.
Right. She maintains the conflict by talking through sounds. The blueprint actually calls it pleasurable onomatopoeia dialogue, like animal noises, glurf, slurp, blorp, even oink, to communicate pleasure. But at the same time, she's telling daddy explicit lies about what's happening.
Right, saying, oh, I'm just teaching Son a little lesson.
Exactly like that. So those noises become this sort of counter narrative, right? Marking her submission, her pleasure behind that door.
Wow. And the end state for her.
The climax seems to be her final psychological break. It's phrased as either Piglet breaks it and final, or her just realizing, oops, I'm broken. The dialogue isn't just talk, it's a control weapon and a measure of her collapse.
Okay. It's intense stuff.
Definitely. So bringing this back to you, the listener, what does this incredibly rigid, conflict-heavy structure tell us?
Well, I think it really highlights how a story can weaponize dialogue.
And concealment, right? Make them tools for dominance, for this intense psychological release rather than just, simple communication.
That's a powerful way to put it. Okay, here's a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. This source material sets up a situation where unconditional love, mommy unconditionally loves the son, exists right alongside total submission and deep resentment, mommy hates daddy.
That core conflict.
So does that mandated really extreme internal conflict essentially guarantee the dramatic tension stays cranked up so high that the marriage has to dissolve? Is that the only possible release valve built into the system? Something to think about. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling some pretty intense source material. It's a rigorous analysis of an erotic narrative called The Architecture of Taboo.
That's right.
And the focus isn't just what happens, but really how the text pushes boundaries using, well, basically just dialogue and psychological limits. So our mission today is to unpack how that structure, that specific setup creates such a potent reading experience.
It really is all about the structure. The analysis calls it a dialogue-only narrative. So you only get voices, sounds, and the absolute key is the barred door.
The door, right?
Yeah, this physical barrier. It guarantees that the core transgressive act, it stays unseen by the character Daddy.
Okay.
And it's his ignorance, his enforced ignorance that just ramps up the taboo. You hear his denial getting more and more panicked.
And we, the listener, we get this kind of privileged position, don't we? The analysis talks about a third-person, omniscient, silent whisper.
Exactly. We know everything.
We hear the degradation that Daddy is trying so hard not to understand. That gap, that dramatic irony. It feels like the engine of the whole thing.
It absolutely is. And the characters themselves, they function almost like archetypes, like forces in this setup.
Less like people, more like components.
Sort of. You've got Son, who embodies this glib dominion. Then Daddy, the voice of denial.
Always denial.
Always. And then there's Mommy. She's the crucible, the one who undergoes this transformation into what the text calls the so-mom slut.
Okay, and this is where the analysis for me got really fascinating. It pinpoints Mommy's core motivation. It's not just about desire, it's her untouched resentment toward Daddy's mundane void.
The emptiness of the marriage, essentially.
Right, the sheer boredom. And Son is explicitly framed as filling spaces you left empty.
Yeah.
So the transgression is presented almost as, well, fixing a marital problem.
Very extreme fix.
Extremely.
Yeah.
So if the main action is hidden, how does Son actually exert control? The text mentions deliberate glib dominion, explicit mastery.
Verbally, yes.
He uses terms like my sweet sow. But the analysis also highlights this physical technique, slap molesting mastery. What's the significance of that?
Well, think about it. The main act is oral. It's unseen behind the door. So Son targets Mommy's face, her public, refined identity.
Okay.
Since Daddy can't see the bodily degradation, Son makes sure her face, refined features, register what the text calls slutty shame. It's about controlling her visible identity.
Making the internal transformation visible externally, even with the door closed.
Precisely. It confirms the change, even though the act itself is shielded.
Got it. Okay, let's talk about the clash between sound and language here. It seems central. Mommy speaks to Daddy through the door using this delusional, obscene language.
Yeah, that's the term the analysis uses. It's high concept deflection. She says things like she's exploring some tensions or transforming, trying to explain away the noises.
Explain away the gurgling symphony, as the text calls it.
Exactly. That's the objective truth. The onomatopoeia, glurf, slurp, blurp, glumph, these raw sounds.
They act like markers, don't they? Showing the intensity rising.
They absolutely do. They provide the visceral reality that her sophisticated language is desperately trying to cover up.
And Daddy's failure here is, well, it's profound. He's trapped by language, isn't he? He hears these sounds, but just calls them odd.
Or unnatural. He doesn't have the words, the concepts to actually name what's happening.
It confirms the text calls it marital impotence. He literally can't process the transgression.
Right. And that failure hits its peak when Mommy's human voice just disappears. It's replaced entirely by that sound. The piglet climax. That's the term. It signals her complete regression, her full transformation into the so-mom slut.
And the real twist, the paradox, is how this total degradation is framed. It's presented as a kind of chaotic liberation.
A necessary one, according to the narrative's logic. It fulfills some deep, suppressed need in her.
Leading to euphoria and even unconditional love for Son, strangely enough.
But there's a cost, a very specific cost. The analysis points out the only structure destroyed is Mommy's marriage.
The sociological structure collapses to allow for the psychological relief.
Exactly. And Daddy's final act, or non-act, is refusing to look. His last words are, I won't. He preserves the taboo by choosing ignorance one last time.
So wrapping this up, what's the takeaway for you, the listener? The argument seems to be that in this extreme framework, psychological liberation demanded destroying the mundane void, the boring marital structure that held the desire in check.
Which leads to maybe a final thought to chew on. How does the absolute necessity of denial, specifically Daddy's willful ignorance, become the very thing that paradoxically allows the transformation, the taboo, to actually succeed? His refusal to see enables the whole thing. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a really intense piece of contemporary Gothic. It's all about forbidden desire, transgression on a massive scale.
Yeah, and our sources dig into how the authors use these incredibly rigid, almost risky structural limits.
To maximize the psychological heat, right? And explore this idea of liberating desire, eros.
Exactly. And the hook, the really fascinating part, is what the analysis calls this dialogue-only cathedral structure.
Dialogue only.
Yeah.
So like no descriptions, no he walked across the room.
Pretty much none. It basically locks you, the listener or reader, and the main character, the father, outside a closed door. You become this sort of impotent witness.
Wow. So you're just hearing things. That structure alone must build incredible tension.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And it forces this very specific way the characters communicate or fail to communicate.
Okay, tell me about that. The sources mentioned a kind of three-way system.
That's right. A tripartite dialectic, they call it. Very rigid. First, you've got the character's son. He's the dominator.
And he speaks only to mommy.
Yes, using what's termed explicit mastery. Think possessive, really dehumanizing language like, my sweet sow. It's about control. Pure dominion.
Oof. Okay, and mommy, how does she talk?
Well, towards the father, her communication is all eloquent obscurity. It's sophisticated, full of innuendo.
Like she's hinting at things.
Exactly. It functions like a veiled plea, maybe, or a confession, but it's all wrapped up in a social lie. She might say something like, he's filling spaces you left empty.
Which is technically true in the subtext, but sounds like an accusation in the moment.
Precisely. It's this clever, almost cruel ambiguity. She gives him clues, but...
But the father,
Hmm?
he doesn't pick up on it,
Yeah.
or doesn't want to.
That's the third part. He represents the collapsing social order, and he's defined by panic denial. He hears things, odd sounds, the text says.
But he won't open the door.
He refuses. He's trapped by his own denial chains, they call it. His refusal is actually key to the whole thing unfolding.
Because if he acted, he'd interrupt it.
Right. And because he doesn't act, and because you, the reader, can't see anything, the narrative needs another kind of proof.
The sounds.
The sounds. The explicit, really specific onomatopoeia. The source material highlights things like glurf, slurp, blurp.
Those are very visceral.
They have to be. They become the engine of the narrative, the undeniable, visceral proof of the taboo act happening right there behind the door.
So the sounds escalate.
Yeah, the acoustic progression tracks everything. And what finally shatters the father's denial, his psychological wall, isn't mommy's clever language.
It's the sounds again.
It's the final, involuntary, animalistic winks. That's the point of no return. Undeniable proof the social boundary is just gone.
Okay, let's unpack that. The transgression itself.
Yeah.
The sources link it to liberating eros.
Yeah.
Pure desire.
Yes, exactly. It's seen as dissolving the repressive reality principle, basically the rules, the social norms, the marriage itself, all embodied by the father.
And those animalistic winks, they signify something specific.
They mark an instinctual regression. It's a way to achieve what the philosopher Bataille called animal sovereignty. Meaning mommy, by regressing, by shedding her human social identity as wife, becomes kind of ontologically immune to the taboos she's breaking. She's operating outside those rules now.
And her final line, oops, I'm broken. That confirms it.
It confirms that rupture. The symbolic death of her social self. She's acknowledging the break.
There's another term here, obscene lolling. What does that refer to physically?
It's about the mouth, the tongue, the instrument we use for social communication, for language.
Okay.
Obscene lolling describes the active choice to submit that instrument, yielding the mouth to the active obscene violation. It's the physical act of silencing the social self.
Choosing the primal over the social.
Graphically, yeah.
So bringing it all together.
Yeah.
The final outcome.
Yeah.
The sources say it's very specific. Only the marriage breaks.
Right. It suggests the whole act wasn't just, random passion. It was calculated. A surgical strike against the social contract itself.
And none of it could have happened without the father's denial. His observant ignorance, as they put it.
He had to not know or pretend not to know, even with all the evidence. His refusal to intervene was the necessary condition for the whole taboo structure to be completely destroyed.
It really hinges on that refusal, doesn't it?
Okay.
The whole conflict depends on him hearing everything but doing nothing.
Absolutely.
So here's something to think about. If knowledge implies intervention, and intervention stops the transgression, what does it say about our deepest social taboos if ignorance, willful or not, is actually required for them to be so utterly destructively fulfilled?
A powerful question to leave things on.